Hi, this is Jeff from the Create Today channel. Today we're going to have fun with gradients in Photoshop. We're going to look at how you can create some interesting abstract art of your very own using just the gradient tool and some layer effects like gradient overlay. Here's a few things that I've created. But what you create is going to look completely different and be your very own. It's an organic style of creation, and I think you're going to have some fun with it. So why don't we go ahead and dive right in. Okay, let's start with a new document. And for the purpose of this tutorial, I'm going to go ahead and use this preset in here under Film and Video. And it's the HDTV 1080p preset. And I'm doing that because I'm recording this screencast at that resolution, so it'll just work out well when showing you guys on the screen. You can do different sizes, higher resolutions, of course, but we'll keep it simple today. So the only thing I'm going to change is over here. Let's change the background. Instead of white, let's change it to black, and then we'll hit create. Okay. Now you'll see some guides right off the bat. If you don't, then you'd want to turn your guides on. But these guides here are part of that preset that we just selected. So what I really want is some center guides right down the middle, horizontally and vertically. And so I'm going to get rid of these guides here by going to View, and we're going to clear guides. Okay. And then I'm going to create a new guide under the View menu. And I'm just going to say I want a horizontal guide, and I want it 50% of the way across the canvas there. Boom. And then we're going to do the same thing for our vertical guide. Okay, 50%. Make sure to put that percent sign in there. And now we have a nice set of both vertical and horizontal center guides to start everything off. I do this because I often create symmetrical artwork, and I just like having that center point to start with and keep everything kind of, well, symmetrical. So now what we're going to do is I'm going to go ahead and save this file, and I'm going to save that, well, for today I'm just going to save that right out to my desktop. So we're going to call this Fun with Gradients. You can call it whatever you want and save it wherever you'd like, of course. If you like to use the sRGB color profile, you can do that or not, or you know, whatever settings you want here, but we're going to stay in the Photoshop document format for now. So now our documents save before we get to work here. The concept here is that we're going to start with a blank canvas, and we're going to start by using the gradient tool over here. Okay, and we're going to just use the default colors, except I'm going to switch them by clicking this little guy here so that our foreground color is white, background color is black instead of the other way around. Okay, we've got our gradient tool, we've switched the default colors, and I'm going to come up here to the type of gradient that I want, and today I'm going to pick this one here, right here. It's the reflected, you can see it right there. And then up here we're going to just start in the middle, and we're going to just hold our shift key down actually, and I'm going to drag up just a little bit, maybe about there. And it creates this nice kind of beam or bar gradient going right through the middle. Then I'm going to switch my blend mode up here. You see up top it says normal right now. I'm going to switch that actually to lighten. And then I'm going to come back to the center in the middle here. I'm going to drag to the right, holding my shift key down a little bit. You know, this is all just kind of organic and doing it however way you want, but there's no set parameters here exactly. I'm going to do this again with that same tool, still in the lighten mode, and I'm going to kind of drag here at a 45-degree angle, maybe out to about there, and create another beam. You see how they intersect because we're using the lighten mode? So when we create another gradient, it blends over the one underneath it using the lighten blending mode. I'm going to create one more here, starting right in the center, and I'm going to hold my shift key down, and I'm going to drag out, which constrains it in this case to a 45-degree angle, and I'm just going to go to about there. Now it gets a little bit bigger, you notice. That's because I dragged it out there a little bit farther. So again, all this stuff is going to be kind of organic, and it will become very symmetrical, but I'll show you how we do that here in just a bit. I'm now going to switch over to this little selection right here, which is actually a radial gradient. You see as a little tooltip pops up there. I'm going to come out somewhere over here, just anywhere along this kind of middle of this beam, and I'm going to drag out, holding my shift key down again to about there. And you see how we get an interesting little bulge going on in there. In fact, I'm going to zoom this in using Command plus a little bit so you can kind of see that. I'm going to do Command 0 just to kind of fit it on the screen. So I'm going to do that again. I'm going to pull out even farther and see how we get some interesting little shapes starting to happen in there. And I'm going to do that one more time. I'm going to go over a little bit farther, drag it out, boom, get another little weird thing going on there. So we can repeat that, and wherever we want, you can do it on this side, that side, but because we're going to be duplicating this and actually kind of flipping it horizontally on top of itself and then blending it, that's where we'll start to get the symmetry. So I'm kind of focusing more just on this half of the screen right now. So if I do another one of those little radial gradients right in here, interesting, isn't it, the way it blends in there? I could do one maybe up here, maybe another one, you just play with it. It's kind of weird the way it'll blend because we're using the lighten mode, and you can get some really interesting effects here. Now you can also come in and change that. You can play with these different blending modes. For example, I will try difference, and I will drag out a radial gradient in the middle. You see how it kind of ate away at the middle of this whole intersection here? I'm going to undo that and actually do it a little bit larger. I'm going to click right in the center. I'm going to hold my shift key down and drag it out even farther, maybe to there. And see how it kind of sucks down into the middle, almost like a big crater going down. Okay, so now we have something kind of interesting to start with. I think I'm going to turn my center guides off for just a little bit. And I'm going to come up here to the existing layer, and I'm going to drag that down here to this little icon and duplicate the layer. That duplicated layer I want to flip horizontally. So I'm going to go under Edit, I'm going to go to Transform, and then I'm going to come down here to Flip Horizontal. And you can see it kind of flipped across. But what's really going to be cool now is we can take that duplicated layer and we can change the blending mode. Where it says normal here, we're going to start changing that. So for example, I can click and go to multiply, or I can go to linear burn. Now we can go through these much quicker without clicking on this. If we make sure we're in a selection tool, I'm going to hit M on the keyboard. I already am in a selection tool actually, but this won't work unless you are. So make sure you're in a selection tool, and then if you hold Shift and you hit your plus sign on your keyboard, or your minus sign to go backwards, I'm going to hit plus, and you see how it's going to jump through different blending modes. Lighten looks pretty cool. I'm looking for one that keeps it very symmetrical. Some of these don't. I mean, that's symmetrical, but we only have those other little elements at the bottom. That one's cool. Lighten, screen, color dodge. So you can see by toggling through these blending modes, you can get very different appearances. Lighten colors, very similar to lighten. And we're just going to toggle through some of these. If you see something interesting, you can go with it, you know. That's why I call it organic, because that's kind of interesting. Not perfectly symmetrical, but you're getting some really cool little shapes going on over in here. See how it kind of carves out these things? I like that. But I'm going to go ahead and keep going here so you can see all the different variations just by blending that flipped layer with the underlying layer. Very interesting, isn't it? Okay, so I'm going to keep going here till we get to, I'm going a little bit quicker. There's lighten. I kind of like that lighten. It's very symmetrical, and it's got a cool look to it. So I'm going to save my file. Oh, I had to turn that off. So now we have a real symmetrical, interesting shape. We've started this with just the gradient tool, and you can see already some of the things you can achieve. So we want to take it to the next level. Now we're going to take these two layers that we have, and I'm going to first unlock the background layer here. Then I'm going to hold my Shift key and select the duplicate layer, so I have them both selected. Let's go up here in the layers palette, this little pop out here, and we're going to go to new group from layers. Okay, so I'm going to combine those two layers into a little folder, basically a group. We'll just call it reflected. You can call it whatever you want. I'm doing this so I can save those two working layers in case I ever want to play with the blend modes again and get a different look and what have you. But I do want to duplicate this now by dragging it down here, and I want to have that folder selected, and I want to go up here again, and we're going to merge the group. So what that does is those two layers that we had blending together so nicely, we've combined them almost as though you had just flattened the file down into a flat, uneditable one image. But we did save those two layers down here, so if we want to come back later and play around, get different variations, we have them. You don't have to do that, but I like to kind of work non-destructively and have options for future creations too. So just an extra step. I'm going to turn that off for now because we're not using it. And let's focus on this reflected copy here, and we're going to take this and we're going to take it to the next level. So I like going into filter gallery, and we're going to come up here to artistic and kind of uncollapse that so we can find the plastic wrap filter. Now you could try all kinds of different filters. There's so many different options with this stuff, but I'm going to try plastic wrap, and you see how it starts to really get some interesting weird highlights and reflections in there. I think I'll click down here and select, instead of 100%, fit in view, so we can kind of see what's happening there. And I can turn that off, back on, using this little eyeball to see, you know, here's how it was before, here's the plastic wrap effect. So I kind of like that. It's pretty weird. Let's go with it. I'm going to hit OK, and there's our plastic wrap effect. Now, before I save this, I'm going to come up here. This is just another option that you can play with under the Edit menu. You have this Fade Filter Gallery. That's the last filter that you applied, and you can kind of undo, but you can undo it in a way that lets you play with the blend mode, the opacity of the undo. So in other words, instead of just completely undoing it, we can fade that effect back or change the way that effect actually is blending. So if we try some different blend modes here, you see what happens? Now we get off into some even weirder effects here. You know, it's just, you can really play with this stuff. So I encourage you to try as you go along. You don't have to do exactly what I'm doing. Play with this stuff. You know, that's the whole idea. It's organic. So we'll try hard light. We try, some don't have a huge effect, others do. So and again, you can play with the opacity of that. A lot of variations here. Let's go back and look at multiply there for a second. That's pretty interesting. You can uncheck this preview. See, okay, here's what we had. Here's what we have right now. Yeah, they're both kind of cool. I think I'm going to go with that multiply. So we're fading the last filter. We're going to leave it at 100%, and I'm trying the multiply blend mode this time. So I'm going to hit OK, and there we go. I'm going to save that. Now we've got something pretty cool going on here. This looks good, but it's very gray, isn't it? We want to inject some color into this. So now we're going to go to our channels palette, which I have right here. Yours might be in a different location, but get into your channels palette, and let's just pick one of these channels, like the blue channel. So I'm going to select that, and I want to duplicate it. So I'm going to drag it down here onto this little icon, duplicate that channel. So now we can mess around with this channel a bit. My goal here is to adjust this a little bit with levels until we have something we can use as a selection to then colorize the actual image that we're creating. So let's bring up our levels And in levels, over here I'm going to grab on the shadow end of the spectrum here, and I'm going to pull this in. I'm going to pull that in, and you see how it starts changing? It's kind of eliminating some of the stuff there. So I'm going to go right about there, and then I'm going to go over to the highlight side, this white triangle here, and I'm going to drag that to the left and kind of just brighten that up quite a bit, but I want to leave the edges. See how the edges of those shapes kind of taper off in gray? I think I'll leave that about like that. Okay, and then hit OK. And yours is going to be a little different depending on what you're doing and how you choose to adjust it. Again, organic, it's always different. So we're going to use this channel that we just duplicated and manipulated. We're going to load that as a selection. Okay, so I'm on a Mac, so I'm going to hold my Command key down and click right here. That would be the Control key on a PC, and that loads that channel as a selection. You see the marching ants there. I'm going to go back to my RGB channels here and back to my layers palette. So we've essentially created a selection and we've loaded it up, and now we're going to want to colorize these areas of the image, and I'm going to show you how we're going to do that. Let's start by creating a new layer, and we want to fill this selection with a color on that layer. It doesn't really matter what color, and I'll show you why in just a minute. I'm going to press Option Delete or Alt Delete on a PC to fill that with the foreground color. Now I can deselect, and the key thing we're going to do here is we're not going to have that black. We're going to take that layer, we're going to go over here to this fill percentage, we're going to drop that all the way down to 0. And I know you're probably like, what's going on? There's nothing there now. The reason we do that is all we want to do is apply some layer effects to this. I don't want to see that actual fill color, I just want to see the layer effects. So now that we've put the fill to 0%, we have the layer selected, we're going to come down here to the little layer effects icon, and we're going to add a gradient overlay. Let me move this palette over here a little bit so you can see a little better. Well, let's pick a gradient. These are just kind of some default gradients in here. I'm just going to pick this one, for example. And you can see how we're starting to colorize just where that selection was, or where we filled that layer, basically. So it's just looking at where there's pixels in the layer and applying that layer effect. Now that's kind of cool, but it's really flat. It's just in a normal blending mode. So we're going to play with these blending modes, like multiply. You see how it starts to blend with the underlying image. We can try overlay. I kind of like overlay, but you can play with all these different settings here for the blend mode and see which one you like. I think I'm going to start with just overlay to keep it simple. Looks pretty cool. Now of course you can change the type of gradient too. So this is linear, meaning just kind of straight up and down, and that's based on the angle that we have here. I'm going to try reflected. So you see it takes that gradient and it's reflected both top and bottom. And if we change this angle, it's obviously going to change how it's going across there. I'm going to stick with 90 degrees for now. You can also adjust the scaling of the gradient as to how it applies across there. I think maybe I'll do 100%. And you can always actually drag the gradient around just right out here on the canvas. It can be kind of interesting. I'm going to reset the alignment by clicking this little button. You can play with opacity. So a lot of options here that you can play with, but let's start with that. So we have one gradient overlay on top of that layer that we created. I'm going to hit OK. So now we can turn that on and off. Here's what we had. Now we've colorized based on where the pixels were. Okay, let's go ahead and add some more color. We're going to do that by going up to this layer that we just worked with, and I'm going to hold my Command key down or Control key on the PC and click on that layer right there to load it as a selection. Now we want to inverse that selection because we're going to try and colorize this other area out here that's gray right now. So I'm going to come up under Select and go to Inverse. So it's going to basically do the opposite of the selection that we had. We're going to do the same thing again. We're going to create a new layer, just like we did before. We're going to fill it with a color. In this case, I'm going to do black again. Option Delete or Alt Delete on a PC. I can deselect now. And again, we're going to come up to that layer, change the fill value to 0. Okay, because we're going to apply another gradient overlay effect on this layer. So let's come down here again. Let's go to Gradient Overlay. And we're going to, you can see now we're starting to affect the area out here that was gray. I'm going to pick a different gradient this time. Oh, maybe that one. And of course you can load more gradients in here. There's lots of gradient libraries you can try. I'm just using the default little set here right now. But let's pick that one so we have something a little different. And we could play with changing this to radial. So it's kind of going in a circle here. Again, you could adjust this out. The percentage of the scaling, that's how, you know, how large your gradient is as it goes across the image. We could try a diamond. We could try just linear. You know, you can play with all these options. So I think maybe I'll go with something like that. Just kind of pulling things around, trying different things. Now that's in an overlay mode. Again, we can play with the blending modes again. You can see you can get all kinds of interesting effects. Multiply, hard light, the hard mix even gets you really extreme hard edge stuff. Color. That's kind of cool actually, isn't it? So this is just a color blend mode. It's just colorizing the underlying pixels. So I kind of like that. I think I'll just go with that. And you can just play with it and pick whatever you want, because again, it's an organic process. You know, just have fun with it. Okay, why don't we do one more thing before we bring this video to a close. Let's go to our channels palette. And you can see in here, you know, we have our 3 red, green, and blue. We have our copy we made earlier when we were colorizing. But let's look at the different channels. Red, that's pretty interesting looking. Green, that's cool on its own also. And blue. Each one is very unique. So I think let's take the red channel. That looks cool. Let's duplicate it down here. And with that duplicated red channel, let's bring up our levels. And again, we'll adjust this kind of like we did the first time with the blue channel copy. I'm just going to pull this shadow end way in, so we're just kind of grabbing that little bit of area out here. I want to brighten it up, because remember, this is going to end up being a selection we're going to use to colorize. So that's good, you know, just whatever looks good to you. Realizing that wherever it's white, it's going to load as a selection. I'm going to command click on that channel. That's control click on a PC. Let's go back to the RGB channels here as a composite. Back to our layers. And one more time, we're going to create a new layer. We're going to fill it with black. That's Option Delete or Alt Delete on a PC. I'm going to deselect that. We're going to change the fill to 0. And again, just one more time, we're going to add a gradient overlay. Okay. And I think this time we'll pick something wild like that with its rainbow color. Of course, you can pick whatever you want. You know, you can try different things. That's kind of cool too. Okay. And I think I'll just leave it in the color blend mode. That looks kind of cool. We could change the scaling of it here if we want to. I think I kind of like that. I think that looks good. So again, you could play with the blend modes, you could play with which gradient, what kind of gradient. Right now we're reflected, but I think I'll just leave it there. Looks pretty cool. So I'm going to hit OK. So basically we've just done a very similar thing that we've done throughout this tutorial by loading a selection, making a new layer, filling it with a color, changing that fill all the way down to 0, then applying a layer effect of the gradient overlay. Let's get rid of the guides and look at what we've created. Looks pretty cool. And it's organic. You're always going to get something different. You're just kind of almost like molding clay. You know, you start with a blank canvas here, and then we just massage it. We use different tools. We play with the blend modes, the different gradients, and reflecting layers to get this symmetry going on. So I'm going to save this, and I think we'll bring this particular tutorial to an end. I'll probably do some more with gradients and different techniques with gradients, but I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. If there's anything I can do to help improve them, certainly let me know. But for now, I hope you had fun with gradients. If you enjoyed this tutorial, please click the like button. And be sure to subscribe so you can get the latest videos that I post as they come out. Thank you much. This is Jeff from the Create Today channel. See you next time.